students. How are you guys? I hope you're enjoying your summer somehow. Once again, thank you for being back, and today we will be talking about a horror film, actually two horror films, which are The Conjuring 1 and 2. Some of you might know already that I am actually not a horror film person, but it somehow got to me these days, and I just decided to watch these two movies. So it's actually the first time that I have been watching these two movies, unlike the previous experiences which I have watched them before, and I'm trying to share them with you through this video project. But anyways, since I'm not a horror film person, I don't watch horror films that much, but sometimes I do watch thrillers. So therefore I think the closest experience that I have been with horror films or horror games in probably this year would be the horror game by Red Candle, which is called Devotion. Anyways, I'm not an expert in horror films, but there's still quite a few things that I find rather interesting and would like to share with you. But to begin with, let's just start with the story of both The Conjuring 1 and Conjuring 2. So in the first episode, the episode of The Conjuring, it is a story of a family of 6 who just moved to this new house in the countryside. However, weird things started happening one by one, and eventually they decide to seek help from Mr. and Mrs. Warren, who are known as supernatural specialists. And things somehow quickly escalated, like how when in the beginning it's only one of the children seeing like images or probably spirits, and then it turns out to be the bed shaking really like severely, and furniture is getting knocked down, and so on. So, as in the previous film, the family decided to seek for help from Mr. and Mrs. Warren, and once again they found out the demon that has been lurking in their house, and once again performed exorcism and helped the family out of their misery. So, through my really unexperienced experiences of watching horror films, I think there are some interesting points. So the first one is how there's this difference between Western horror films and Eastern horror films. So for me, I think, I don't know if it's because of how I can more culturally relate to Eastern horror films. I find them more spooky, more scary, and they sort of linger on to me longer, like I can't sleep at night and so on. But for Western films, they hardly have the same effect. To me, it's just like jump scares when I was watching the movie. So this might be due to my lack of horror film experiences, or just simply because I'm biased. Yeah, also in Western films, it seems to me that those horror elements come from the terrifying or monster-like gruesome effects, instead of like in Eastern films how they actually create the sort of like creepy atmosphere. Despite the fact that I don't think Western films are as scary or as creepy, these two films still gave me the spooks nevertheless. And well, actually a lot of Western films still like frightens me a lot, but I think these two are renowned for obvious reasons. So secondly, I think what's interesting is how religious based or how religious related horror films usually are. Once again, I don't know if this is due to my lack of experiences in watching horror films, or is it really due to these cultural backgrounds. I find that Western films are more emphasized on the probably like the fight between the good and evil, or the fight between the demons and gods, especially when it comes to exorcism. However, like in Eastern films, it seems to me those spooks or those spirits are somehow like random spirits, and who are often either wronged or who are seeking revenge. And I think this has something to do with our more pantheism, like religious belief, rather than the Christian belief of how there's this holy God or Holy Spirit and so on. Yeah, so in Western film, it seems to me that, especially like as mentioned previously in The Conjuring 1 and 2, the solution to the two families' like tragic experiences are often by performing exorcism. Like, once you win this fight, once you sort of like win over the devil or the demon, then by the power of God, then problem solved. However, for me, like in Eastern films, I don't watch it that much, but due to my like previous experience of playing the game Devotion, or just by watching some trailers, it seems to me that sometimes there are no solutions to the ghosts or the spirits of Eastern horror films. Like, sometimes it just sticks you forever, sort of. Well, lastly, what I find really interesting in these two films are, once again, the importance of names. I might have mentioned this, well, I have mentioned this if you have seen the previous videos on Into the Wild, the importance of names. It's especially important when it comes to The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2, because at the end of both films, sorry, spoilers, the Warrens somehow saved the families by performing exorcism and like saved the person who was possessed by the demons. And a key element in performing a successful exorcism is that you will have to demand the devil's name. You will have to know its name, and that is the only way that you can win the fight between the devil. So I'm sort of like stealing this idea or concept from one of my friends, Scarlett Liu. She once mentioned in one of her like speeches that naming something or the name of something is so important in probably, I think, basically the Western world, is because it is believed that once you give something a name, then it means that you have defined that certain thing or that certain object or that certain person, and therefore you sort of included the thing into one of your systems, and therefore you will have control over it. For instance, some of the better known examples are like Voldemort in Harry Potter. Since people fear him, they don't name him. So they usually call Voldemort by he who must not be named, or you know who, but only like Dumbledore or Harry Potter, who do not fear Voldemort, can call him by Voldemort, and therefore they are able to defeat him. So I think this is like sort of a similar concept. When it comes to performing like exorcism, you will have to know the demon's name, therefore you sort of define the devil, and by calling its name, you have the power over him. Therefore, it has become one of his or its weakness, and that's how you would be able to like defeat the demon and perform a successful exorcism. I think that's basically what I think about the film. I'm sorry that probably I didn't mention a lot of details from the movies, but what I would like to emphasize at the end of this video is I think these two are very interesting movies, and they are actually famous and loved for pretty obvious reasons. For instance, they do have a pretty good balance between the suspense and the frightening, and it comes at pretty good timings and sometimes unexpected timings as well, which I think is sometimes a pretty key element for entertainment in horror films. So it doesn't only focus on jump scares, or it doesn't only give you the frights by jump scares, but it also actually sort of like builds up the atmosphere, which are not as often seen in Western horror films, at least during like for my experience, though once again, I don't have many experience in watching horror films. I also think that these films are interesting in the sense that it's not only about like demons or ghosts or spirits, but since this is like based on true stories of the Warren family or the Warren files, like how Mr. and Mrs. Warren investigate in different haunted houses cases, so it somehow makes me feel like a little bit more safe when I'm watching these two films. Like, you feel you are safe when Mr. and Mrs. Warren are present and they have solved the problem, so they will not be like following you around. So even though I sometimes get frightened when watching the film, and I think it does a really good job by building up the atmosphere, after I finish the film, the fright finishes. Like, it wouldn't follow you around, or it didn't follow me around after I finished the film. So I think that's a really good thing about horror films, because I hate it when like after I finish the film I keep thinking about it and still feel scared. But yeah, anyways, before ending the film, there are two questions for you. First of all, what are these two stories about? what is the story of The Conjuring 1 and what is the story of The Conjuring 2, just probably in 1 or 2 sentences, if you may. And secondly, what are your personal opinions on like Western horror films or Eastern horror films? Like which one do you enjoy more if you ever watch horror films, and why or why not? That's basically it for today, and thank you again for being here. I'll see you soon. Bye bye!